Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're talking about the world of APIs, otherwise known as application programming interfaces. No doubt about it, today's enterprise IT runs on the API. To discuss that, I'm joined by someone very close to the topic. With me is Marco Palladino, Chief Technology Officer and co-founder at Kong. Marco, happy Friday to you. Very good to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me here.
I want to talk about APIs, and I want to ask your sense of what's going on in the API market and the API management solution market. But first, let's do a little background, very 101. Indulge me if you would. Give me sort of the 15-second, Wikipedia explanation. What is an application programming interface?
It's a very exciting technology. It is what powers our digital world in pretty much everything that we do today. Every time we go buy a ticket, we travel, we go anywhere, we call an Uber, it is an API that powers that digital experience. APIs are technology that allows to connect different type of software together. And so, for example, when we build a mobile application and we want to look at a map with our phone doesn't have all the maps, of course, and APIs is the mean of communication that allows us to connect with the Google servers and then pull that map on our phone. So pretty much everything that we do today in the modern world, there is an API that powers that, even if we don't know it.
Right. I think people don't realize exactly how central the API is. I mean, the API is basically the pipes, the framework that makes everything work.
That's exactly right. It's the highway that allows us to extract services and data from pretty much anywhere in our systems.
Mm-hmm. All right, so you're close to the market. I'd like to get your sense of the market for API management solutions. A lot going on there. What are the trends driving that market here in the year 2023?
Yeah, so I'm going to start by saying I've been in this market for many years. And I remember when I first started, people were asking us, what is an API? And now everybody knows what an API is. Everybody has a strategy for API or is developing a strategy for API. And I think that, James, when we really look at the point in time where we are at right now, I think it's a very exciting time. It's a time where we are transitioning from the traditional world of building software to this new API-powered world. And really, this is a singularity that will never happen again in the history of humanity. And developers that are building this new world are the heroes of APIs because they are the ones that are either building them or consuming them and stitching them together.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Marco. Can you explain what you mean by this is a generational switch? What exactly do you mean by the generational shift there?
The way we're building software has fundamentally changed in a very radical way. Other industries that have experienced that transition like this is, for example, cameras, when we transition from analog cameras to digital cameras. And this type of transformation is happening today in the technology and software world with APIs. Software used to be built in a very siloed way. We used to build a large software with large code bases that fundamentally was very hard to enable to communicate with other software. And that made it very hard for organizations and developers to create new experiences with that software. But then as mobile came out, as AI in these last few months, we've been seeing an explosion of AI in the world. As these new use cases are coming up, including IoT and wearable devices and so on, we need to have an API to be able to cater our services to all of these different ways that people use to consume our APIs and to consume our services. And so APIs have fundamentally shifted how we build software. It's not monolithic anymore. It's with an API first and foremost. It's distributed by default, and it's pluggable through APIs in all of these different devices and all of these different experiences that we want to create. When we say that our fridges and our cars are going to be connected to the internet, we're really saying that there's going to be an API that does that. Right. And this is a generational shift in the history of our industry, because this transition happened once and never again. And we are living and breathing it right now.
Interesting. Okay, that is really fascinating. The amazingly, shockingly, stunningly interconnected nature of the world enabled by the API. Okay, so I interrupted you. Please continue with your view of the trends.
That's exactly right. So APIs, they started as an add-on on top of monolithic applications. And the trend that we're seeing right now is really an explosion of APIs and a massive amount of scale of APIs that organizations are building. I'm working with enterprise organizations that, top Fortune 500, top Global 5,000, that are telling me that in the next 5 years, they're going to be creating more APIs than all of the APIs they've created up until now.
Wow.
That is an enormous amount of scale. And so really what we're seeing as a trend is the increase of adoption of APIs. It's an increase of API use cases, some of them also driven by artificial intelligence. The more AI, the more API, because everything that AI does is powered by an API. An AI without API is an AI that can't do much. It's because of the API integrations that the AI can be smart and intelligent. And we're also seeing—
One question about that, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Is the API there in that AI scenario, is it between the software itself, the algorithm, and then the large language model that feeds it? What are the two things being connected with the AI scenario?
There are two main use cases with APIs and AI. AI needs APIs to be able to learn things and being able to connect with things. APIs are essentially the communication line that allows AI to exit its own silo and being able to interact with the real world. But then AI can also be the developer building on top of those APIs. So the AI can use APIs to retrieve information that makes the AI smarter, but then the AI can also be the user of those APIs to build a new application on top of those APIs. And so what we're seeing is really APIs being the underlying fabric that allows AI to be successful in the world.
Okay. Again, I want to make sure you finish with your sense of the trends. Anything more to say about the trends there?
Yeah, and I think that there is one trend that it's pretty clear to everyone. When we started with APIs, it was very opportunistic. There were different teams trying to cater to these new use cases, and each one of them was trying to figure out how to build APIs and how to manage those APIs. As APIs is now clear, are at the backbone of everything that the organization does, those APIs cannot be managed in a very tactical way. And so we're seeing these with cyber attacks. APIs are the number one vector for every cyber attack we are seeing and reading about in the news whenever there is an attack. And so APIs cannot be managed in a very opportunistic way, different teams doing their own thing, but organizations are developing an API vision that can bring to life an API platform which can cater to the broader API use case across every team in the organization. So this is, I think, is a trend that really signifies the new maturity level that organizations have when they're thinking of APIs.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right, well, I think that APIs offer so many opportunities, but there are some struggles and challenges. So what do you see as the common problem the companies have with API management? And the big question is, how do you recommend companies handle these challenges?
Like always, the problems are twofold. There is a technology problem, and then there is a management problem. Let's start with the technology problem. APIs are going to be built for every team and every application that the teams creates. It is clear today that everyone in the organization is going to be needing an API infrastructure that can support the modernization and the innovation that the organization is building. So APIs, from a technology standpoint, they have to be able to cater to different teams running across different platforms. And so APIs and an API platform needs to be able to cater to the traditional north-south use case as well as the service mesh use case. It needs to be able to do that across modern platforms like Kubernetes and more traditional platforms like virtual machines. If the organization has all of these environments running on VMs and containers and Kubernetes, well, then the APIs have to be managed across all of these different environments. So being able to have a platform that can run everywhere, of course, that's something that's quite important. And it is challenging to implement this type of solution because essentially we have to go to the teams and tell them to stop doing what they're doing and instead try to focus on building on top of the platform. And here is the other problem, which is the management problem. How do we, as leaders of the organizations that we're working, how do we enable the teams to be successful on an API platform that they stop building and they start using? We don't want them to be the builders of API platforms. We want them to be the users of that API platform. We want that API platform to be like electricity, always available, always on. Just plug it in and it works. And so how do we go about rolling out across every team this type of platform? That is, yes, a technology problem, but it's also a management problem. And I think that at the end of the day, the responsibility for implementing this type of initiative always falls on the shoulders of the leaders of the organization. So this is not someone else's job anymore.
So really, explain more the management piece here, so I'm clear on that. Please clarify that one.
I think that in the past, there was lots of comfort in being able to tell the teams, go ahead, do your thing, and we trust you to do, to choose the right technology and make the right assumptions to run the APIs. And they did that with one team and then another team and then another team and then another team. And so eventually over the years, now we have all these teams that have one common use case, managing APIs and securing APIs, and yet they have 10 different ways of doing that. That type of fragmentation slows down the organization, introduces new complexity, and quite frankly, also slows down the teams themselves. Instead of building products and being able to building experiences for their customers, they're building infrastructure that is outside of the core competency of what they should be doing. And really this lowers the efficiency of the developers. And so I think that there must be, and we're seeing this at Kong, we're seeing this with organizations today that have a very strong API vision, and they're telling their teams that they're catering to all of the requirements. They're giving them a certain degree of freedom to be able to experiment and still move rapidly and still move very quickly, being agile, but yet at the same time, unifying how security is being handled, unifying how certain controls are being managed in a unified way. When you look at a company that has done it very well, of course, that's Amazon. Amazon was an organization that was very futuristic at, 20 years ago. They had this API vision that they executed upon. And now we have AWS as a result of that. Amazon was not the first e-commerce company in the world, and yet it was the only one where AWS could become a reality. And that is because they had a very strong API vision alongside a very strong business vision.
It's fascinating. There really is about AWS. I'm not surprised. All right, let's talk about Kong itself. How is Kong addressing the API needs of its clients? What role does Kong play?
When Kong came to life in 2015 as a technology, we were capturing a transition in the market from monolithic to microservices in Kubernetes. This was a type of deployment that our competitors at the time were not supporting very well. And so when Kong came to life, we came to life with that idea of being performant, of being extensible, of being portable, and being fast in everything that we do. Performance in this new API world, it's not just a nice to have, it's a must have, because with all of these communications, API communication going back and forth, we do have a lot more compounding latency that accumulates over time. And when that latency gets too high, then the overall experience that we're serving to our users and to our customers is poor. And then the customers will churn and the users will leave. So performance really can be correlated to customer experience. And we came to the world with this new platform that allowed us to do that in a very nice way. Then over the years, we have expanded our platform. APIs were not just about API management. It was also about service mesh, being able to manage connectivity inside of the applications, service mesh, in addition to connectivity across different applications, and that is API management. And then finally, we could have the best API infrastructure in the world, but if nobody uses and consumes our APIs, that infrastructure is useless. The value of APIs and the API infrastructure is being given by the consumption that we're able to generate on top of these APIs. If there is no consumption, these APIs are just sitting there. Nobody's using them. Right. And so to incentivize the consumption of APIs, there is a whole area of API productivity that enables the developers to be more productive when they create APIs or consume APIs. And so Kong provides today a platform that goes from API productivity with Insomnia through API management with Kong Gateway, all the way down to service mesh with our Kong Mesh offering.
So the Kong platform, companies, I assume, access it through an API? Please explain that part.
So these are the main pillars of our platform, and the whole platform is being served via Connect. Connect is our cloud, enterprise cloud that Kong provides, and our customers that want to either provision gateways or meshes, or they want to make their developers more productive, they can go on Connect and provision as many gateways and as many service meshes as they need across the entire organization. And again, this is true for Kubernetes, but also virtual machines, single cloud, multi-cloud, and of course, then we also support data center and on-premise deployments as well. So right. Connect is the unified platform. It's the single source of truth for all of the APIs. And then the underlying technologies are gateway meshes and API productivity.
Got it. Okay. Well, let's look to the future of the API. I mean, obviously, as you say, we are in a generational shift with the API where it's becoming more and more central. I mean, the world is really driven by the API and API access. If you look a few years out, what do you see in terms of the future of the API? I'm thinking artificial intelligence will be routing and rerouting APIs, perhaps with little or no human interface. What do you expect?
The vision that we have for the industry and for the API world that we're seeing and living and breathing, that is a vision that we're executing, that we're building ourselves. I believe that APIs are fundamentally going to be running in a different way, let's say even 4 or 5 years from now. We're going to be replacing API configuration with API behaviors. We're not going to be asking our developers to configure directly the APIs and what they should be doing, but we're going to be setting boundaries and behaviors that we want to enforce that are going to be fully automated with GitOps and API ops in the developer workflow. API infrastructure will disappear. API infrastructure will be always there, always available, always running, always secure, but developers will stop thinking of APIs as a problem, the same way we have guarantees that when we build software, we do have internet connections working and we do have mobile devices running. The same way we're going to be leveraging APIs, but stop worrying about APIs. That configuration will be replaced with behaviors that fully integrate in the developer workflow.
That is fascinating. So really the behaviors will be sort of like a low-code, no-code way to interface with an API. Explain to me a little bit more of the idea of the API behavior versus the current API.
We can create API pipelines that allow us to essentially take an open API spec that a developer is creating and pushing that open API spec in Git. And based on that trigger, being able to identify what category of APIs we're running. Is it a staging API? Is it production? Is it customer facing or is it internal? And then based on that, enforce a pipeline that both enacts configuration in an automated way and at the same time triggers the right chain of approvals within the organization itself that allows us to determine if what the APIs that the developers have built is indeed the API that we want to publish. But all of that is going to disappear from the underlying complexity of the infrastructure. So today, when we use APIs, we really have to put lots of thought in how do we deploy our meshes? How do we deploy our gateways? How many gateways do we have? And instead, what we want is to deploy them once and then leverage these pipelines to determine in what box the APIs that the teams are creating are going to be put in.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. I see that would definitely move development forward exponentially. Marco, I think you said it. It's going to be a fascinating sector to follow in the years ahead. I very much appreciate you sharing your insight today and hope you come back and talk with us again sometime. Thank you.
Thank you, James, for the opportunity.